Hello, this is Sam Calagione. Welcome to the Better Beer Authority.
Better Beer Authority, Better Beer.
Hi, my name is James Knott, and this is your Better Beer Authority. This is part 2 of our interview with Sam Calagione. He recently broke some news on the Better Beer Authority, but he wasn't supposed to, so he asked us to cut it out. But now the news is out. Randall Jr. is here. Check out his interview. So who's Randall?
Randall is my homeboy. Randall.
Why should beer geeks get to know Randall?
Because basically that started when Dogfish took on a bunch of our West Coast buddies at an event in Washington, D.C. Because I was running my mouth and saying, oh, they were all like, oh, West Coast hoppy beers. And we were like, wait a second, before there was the awesome Sierra Nevada and Liberty and things like that, there was Ballantine's Burton Ale, like 60 IBUs, and then, you know, big 9, 8, 10% wood age beer, and brewed on the East Coast in like the 50s. And that started that argument. We went down there and took them on. I knew Vinny and Tommy and would be bringing some sick beers. So I went by a scrapyard and I found this long, crazy piece of stainless, came I think from the pharmaceutical industry. And we MacGyvered that into the first Randall. Ran 120 through it, the hops, the oils on the hops, you know, this beer alcohol act as a solvent, strip the flavors off. And it really worked. And now it's evolved. We made over 250 of those big size different iterations of Randall. They're in, you know, China, Australia, all over the place. We are, I don't know that we've announced it yet, but I guess I'll announce it now.
Yeah, break some news.
How long till this thing runs?
Like a week.
A week. All right, can you cut this part out if my wife yells at me for
Sure.
All right. We're coming out with personal Randalls for $19.99. It'll hold 16 ounces of beer. It has we tested 12 or 14 of these different models. So it has a stainless steel mash sec. It's glass, and so that you can load it with any herbs, spices, hops, or whatever. Let your beer steep, and then transfer into a pint glass. So it makes Randall a lot more affordable and accessible for people to play around with stuff at home.
Hey, folks, you heard it here first.
Possibly, if my wife gives me approval, you heard it here first.
You heard it here first, unless you didn't.
Yes.
What's the worst beer that you've ever brewed?
Worst beer I ever brewed.
I mean, have you ever
never made it out of the pub?
Yeah. But have you had this great idea, you got all these ingredients,
Yeah.
and then you just taste it was awful? Or?
I'm trying to think of one that I haven't really talked about before. I've talked about one we did in like '97 with lavender buds and peppercorn, and it might have just been ahead of its time, but it probably had way too much lavender. People said it tastes like making out with Laura Ashley. So that one we took some smack for, probably rightfully so. When we did a version of Grain to Glass, which is a beer where we use cedar from our friends at Grain Surfboards in Maine, we did a little side batch of that where I flew down mussels from where I Dogfish Head in Maine, and we did instead of like a oyster stout, which we'd done the first time in like '99, 2 or 3 years ago, we did a mussel grain brown ale. And it didn't really work. The mussels didn't work well. That said, we got a beer coming out of the pub. Maybe you can taste it out of the fermenter called Chalk Lobster, which is made with lobster meat and shells and cocoa nibs and stuff. So I think that one will be a lot better than the mussel beer we did.
Okay, you just brewed a beer called Delaware Native Ale, and as kind of a way to support your local community. I mean, why do you know you're growing nationally? I mean, why is local still important to you?
Because this is where, other than the 7 regional salespeople, this is where everyone at this company lives, in Sussex County, Delaware. So we feel an obligation to give back to the community that gave us our livelihoods. And you know what does grow well here. We tried to do pilot batches of hops and barley with the University of Delaware and the Department of Ag, and you know some of that stuff could work, but they involve the scale we use them at, you know, drying, malting, all that additional steps than just growing. Whereas what does grow really well down here that doesn't need processing. So, you know, our buddy did all the parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme for Saison to Buff. We do the local lemongrass for Namaste, local fruits when we do the Positive Contact that's coming out has the locally grown Fuji apples. So we're committed to expanding our program with local fruits, herbs, spices, vegetables, pumpkins, and that's a big part of what we do locally. So DNA was just a way to get all these different communities together. We used a 19th century stone mill to crush all the grain for that beer that they hadn't used for anything other than tours and watching it run, but they hadn't actually used that thing in 100 years for something productive that was eventually sold, so that was pretty exciting. And then we used the local strawberry or pears from Pfeiffer Orchard, peaches. We worked with the governor. We got a proclamation. We're the first state to have an official yeast strain.
Awkward edit. That's the best of the rest of our interview with Sam Calagione. Hey, if Dogfish Head wants to send us a Randall Jr., we'd be happy to feature it on our show. Until then, I'm James Knott, and this is your Better Beer Authority.
Better Beer Authority, Better Beer Authority.